So, hello and welcome to our ongoing Tarot On of 2020 during the current crisis, the health pandemic that started in early January and is continuing through into April as we do this live recording. We're doing some videos here in our Tarot Professionals Facebook group for the Tarot Association. Looking at tarot in all of its aspects. We are looking at the mystical progression that is within tarot. We are looking at the initiation system of the Western esoteric initiatory system that I teach. We are looking at Tarosophy methods of teaching tarot, and I'm reading a bedtime story which I'll come on to in a moment, because we're going to slightly make a change to that. Over the last 16 or 17 sessions, I think, we've been reading from Wake World by Aleister Crowley, a allegory of the spiritual progress that an initiate makes from Malkuth to Kether on the Tree of Life in the Jewish mysticism of Kabbalah, which means an oral tradition or spoken tradition. And the Tree of Life was brought into Western esotericism, and the tarot cards were attributed to the 22 paths on the Tree of Life, and more complex systems, more complex systems of correspondence were made to it. But we followed the journey of Lola Daydream and her fairy prince up the Tree of Life through Wake World in this collection, Conks on Packs. We've also covered in the last two sessions some basic tarot, our tarot in 3 minutes method and our tarot in 10 minutes method, which are ideal for beginners to start with. So if you're watching this as an absolute beginner, particularly as a recording, please go back to the prior session and the session before that, start 2 sessions ago, and then catch up to this current session. Today I'm only going to cover 2 things. We're going to cover a beginning piece on starting to join the cards together. Lots of different ways of doing that. I want to show you our basic method of fastening the cards together in a narrative or story, because our first 2 sessions of the beginners area looked at basic interpretation of the symbols, either through keywords, through challenge, resources and lesson by just looking at the pictures. Or yesterday we looked at the 10 stages of creation and the 4 worlds and the 4 levels of energy, and that's all you need to work out roughly what every card symbolizes in that structure. You only really need to remember 4 things for that, as you'll see in yesterday's session. So, having taught tarot in 3 minutes or 10 minutes, how do we then put the cards together? And that's fairly intuitive to do, but after modelling with NLP, a lot of tarot readers from, I started in the 80s going to psychic fairs and asking people what they were doing, which back then people really didn't want to tell me. So I just sat and watched them as they did readings, and I spent all of my allowance money every weekend going to psychic fairs in Derby and sitting and having my cards read by different people so I could model what they were doing, because I was interested in NLP at the time. So we're going to cover more NLP as we go along for all sorts of reasons. But today we're going to cover joining cards together using a framework that I co-developed with co-author Tali Goodwin, and I think she gave it the sort of keywords that I'm going to use. And then what I would like to do today is read the longer piece that will start our next set of bedtime stories from Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. Now, there are There's several things to say about this, but I'll just read ahead. What I'm going to do is read the little introduction bit of this book to set the scene, and then one of the short stories in it that really relates to tarot. Not in a direct way, but in a subtle way. So I'd like you to bear with me and perhaps contemplate the story after it's been read, and perhaps even buy the book. I'll put a link in the comment section and in the group. So that's Italo Calvino, Invisible Cities, that I'm going to read from the first bit today, and then a bit more of that tomorrow and maybe the day after. And then we may do some longer readings from one of my other favourite authors, Jorge Luis Borges, from this collection called Labyrinths. This one is far more Kabbalistic, very explicitly so, whereas Calvino did write about tarot, and we'll cover that in a later session as well, what Calvino did with tarot. If you excuse me, I do have sore throat for no other reason than hay fever. So here we go. So today we're just going to take a very quick look, the only tarot content we're going to do today. So if you're only interested in tarot, don't want the bedtime story, this is your tarot bit, and you can switch off immediately afterwards. But we're only going to cover something very brief today, and then we're going to go into a lot more detail with more tarot as we go on. So what I'd like to cover today is, we've covered the 3-minute method, the 10-minute method, and then how to join the cards together. If you then go back and look through the previous sessions, you'll find how to read the Celtic cross, my particular approach to that, and the real history of the Celtic cross, which is neither ancient nor Celtic nor a cross. And then that will sort of bring you up to speed to where we are. So what I'm going to cover is two things. They're both the same thing, and basically they're called pinpointing and bridging. And if you've read any of our books, you'll have seen this in a couple of the books, because it's our way of teaching and getting around the question that a lot of people ask is, how can I put the cards together? How can I make a story? And as we've seen from our other sections, then we have really taken a sort of story-driven approach to how we're doing tarot. And that's because when I model people like Rachel Pollack and Mary Greer and Milo Duquette, all of whom I've had the pleasure of watching read, on top of hundreds of thousands of other people over the last 40 years, the better tarot readers, in my opinion, are able to weave a story. They have a narrative ability. So that's why we sort of teach that right from the beginning. Now, pinpointing and bridging is partly modelled as well on the work of Enrique Enriquez, who has a visual, poetic style of reading. His style of reading tends to veer into a surrealist mode of reading, which is very interesting, but here we're just taking the core components of storytelling and applying it to the entire deck, the Waite-Smith deck, whereas Enrique concentrates mainly on the Marseille deck and the majors of that deck, mainly the majors. So here we have the 7 of Wands. And what we do with pinpointing and bridging is, if we had, say, for example, the past and future in a reading, so we might know, I'm going to turn those cards that way round, so I've got past and future this way. So that's the past and that's the future. Say in a Celtic cross, they appear in a Celtic cross. And people want to know how to really weave these together. They can say from our 3-minute method or our 10-minute method what that card means in the future. It means there's going to be magic, because we have the word the magician on the bottom. And in our method we teach to just, for the majors, read just for the majors, just read the archetype, just read what it says. So it's someone who's got the skills and the resources to have everything on the table. They're a magician. So that's a very positive card to have. It means that you're going to cope with things and be successful and so on. In the past, we know that this is the Seven of Wands, so it's the 7 stage in a lifestyle theme because of the wands. It's the 7 stage in the creative process of lifestyle and values, so it's where you've established yourself, but you're not quite have to fend off other people and other beliefs about yourself before you establish this one belief. Okay, so we know separately what those cards mean from our 3 and 10 minute method, but then to weave a more elegant way, weave these in a more elegant way, for this is the past and this is the future, how are we going to join those cards together? And this is what we do. Now, there's a sort of intuitive way of doing it by just looking at them and making the story up as if it's a picture story. In art, tarot could be called, or tarot reading could be called sequential art. That's another fancy word for comic books as well, or as they are now, graphic novels. It's a series of sequential art. They tell a sequential story. And but when we model it, it comes down to 2 basic things, and you can teach this straight off the bat to save people having to develop the experience of doing it for 30 years before they naturally do it. We sort of reverse engineer that, take it from the people who've been doing it many years, and then teach it to the people right at the beginning. And that is pinpointing and bridging. So pinpointing is literally what you think it might be. Just pinpoint one symbol on that card. So we might pinpoint his feet, or we might pinpoint his face, or his hands. There's a series in our Tarosophist International magazine at the moment for members of the Tarot Association talking about using body imagery and symbolism for reading. So hands really tell you a lot about what's going on with the card. The whole body posture and facial expressions and the eyes tell you a lot about what's going on the card, and that we can do quite naturally and quickly. We all have the skill to interpret that. That's why it's good to have a person or a scenic description on the card itself. But if we pinpoint one thing, then say for example the hands holding the wand and the staff, and you can see I've already snuck ahead a little bit, and because I'm doing it a bit intuitively as well. But just as a method, we say pinpoint one thing on the card, and so we might say the hands holding the staff. Okay, so the hands are holding the staff, and this is the past. Okay, that one is the past. And then we pinpoint on this card one thing. Now, because we've already pinpointed something on the other card, it sometimes makes it easier to know what we're going to pinpoint on this card, although sometimes pinpointing something totally different really does do the trick and really fires off a very oracular moment, and that's the way a good story works in the cards. So on this card we're going to pinpoint the wand here, okay, and him holding the wand. And I chose these at random, so it's I've not chosen them particularly because it's got similar imagery, because you'll find that in a lot of the cards when you start this method. You'll be surprised, you'll suddenly do the Magician and the 2 of Pentacles, and you'll pinpoint the belt on this card and the belt on the other card and see some sort of similarity, and see how the 2 cards are different as well. So first of all we pinpoint, and we call it pinpointing, and then what we do is called bridging. So we then bridge, let me put these the other way around, we make a bridge between, let me use this card here, between the 2 things we pinpointed. So I'm going to pinpoint that bit, and I've pinpointed that bit on that card, okay? So we then bridge between the 2 things that we have pinpointed. Okay, so we make a bridge between them, and we simply read the bridge. What is different or the same between the two things we pinpointed? Okay, what is different or the same, or what comes to mind to get from one to the other? Okay, and that's called bridging. That's what Tali calls bridging. So what we then have then is a very simple method of saying, in the past you were trying to hold something that was almost too big for you, and this was causing some sort of conflict, and it's a lifestyle thing, whereas in the future you will be able to hold that thing and reduce it to something a lot clearer, a lot more focused, and hold it in one hand. That will leave your other hand free to point to where you're going. Okay? So what we do, and you can see how natural that sounds. It sounds like I know what I'm talking about, that I'm bridging the cards. And that's because that is what I've done. I pinpointed artificially two things, and then I've allowed my mind to easily bridge between those two things. I'm not trying to hold all of the meanings I have for this card and all of the meanings I have for this card and try and make some complex network of structural meaning between all of them and apply that to the person's question and apply it to the position of the cards being in the past and the future. I've kept it very simple by pinpointing and bridging. Okay, so pinpointing and bridging. You don't have to find similar symbols. You don't have to particularly know which symbol you're going to use. So let's take a look at some very different symbols. I'm going to pull a couple of cards at random. So here, okay, so in this one, I'm going to take the crown. Okay, so this crown. Okay, I'm going to pinpoint the crown on this. I'm going to ignore the fact I know it's the 4th stage of Pentacles, so it's the 4th stage in money and resources. So we're just getting started. We're not even halfway yet, so we need to hold on to what we've got. We don't know what's coming, so it's a sort of pre-halfway stage where we have to be very careful with our resources. And then this card, I'm going to take the dancing children. Take the dancing children as my pinpoint. And this is the final stage, the 10th stage in the world of emotions. So we know that this is a very happy place where all of our emotions have been satisfied because we're at the end. But also these two will become these two because there needs to be a new beginning as well, because the 10 becomes 1 for the Kabbalistic tree of life to cycle round. Okay, so we've got the crown and the children dancing. So I might say it may be that in the past, we'll keep these as past and future, in the past you were wearing a heavy crown of responsibility, and that you felt that you really had to hold that on your own head. But now you can realize that it was always for the happiness of your family, and you can see how it's brought your children together because you're now spending more time with them. And point at this symbol here. So we go from the heavy crown of the past into the dancing children of the future. And so that's bridged to slightly different aspects of the card. Make sense? But that's because that's a nice example, because they are two different cards. This one's halfway almost, this one's at the end, this one's in Pentacles, this one's in Cups. Okay, so you just simply find a symbol, the crown, and then bridge it to another symbol, which in this case is the dancing children. And it still makes sense in terms of the whole context of the cards, because they've been designed very well to show that structure. So it won't matter which symbol you bridge from. You know, you've moved away from the big city in order to enjoy the comforts of home, and so forth. So that's bridging the two backgrounds together. Make sense? And you can bridge and pinpoint and bridge multiple symbols in two cards and weave a massive story between two cards. The other thing as well is that it also points out that a tarot card is a metaphor. It's a collection of symbols. This has many symbols on it, and so does this one. And that's why the cards are what we call multivalent, that they have many meanings depending on the context. The cards tend to have strange attractors of meaning, like the Magician usually means skill, channeling resources, magic, and so on, whereas the Ten of Cups tends to mean happiness and family life and contentment and so forth. But it is possible for the Ten of Cups, in a particular reading for a particular question at a particular moment with a particular combination of cards, the Ten of Cups could hold the same meaning as we might read for the Magician, and vice versa. It's highly unlikely, but they can do it. That can happen with the cards. Generally, there's a matrix of strange attractors that each of the 78 cards has a very specific meaning that we can't really tell, because there isn't one fixed meaning for every single card in every single position. Because otherwise you might as well write on the cards yes, no, black, white, grey, day, night. And that isn't the way the cards work. So we have these 78 strange attracting points that just happens to work. It's enough to tell a story with, to model any situation in the universe, and that's how it works. But we have to pinpoint down and bridge between the symbols based on the question, the situation, the cards. And so hopefully with our 3-minute method, our 10-minute method, and bridging, pinpointing and bridging, that's enough to start reading and practice for a good whole year worth of readings, to actually then add everything else that you ever learn on top of that. Marcy, with the 2 different shoes on the 7 of Wands, it is because it's explained fully in our book Secrets, my book with Tali Goodwin, Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot by Llewellyn, and it's because this figure is actually based on a Shakespearean figure called Petruchio, and Petruchio attends a wedding in Taming of the Shrew, and it's described as 1 shoe half laced and 1 boot buckled, and you can see very carefully that Pamela has actually shown this shoe is unlaced. Can you see the detail? It's an unlaced shoe. It's exactly the quote in Taming of the Shrew, where Petruchio attends the wedding to make a mockery of the wedding by dressing up in odd shoes and odd dress, and he says, when the guests get all rowdy, he makes a big show of standing in front of Kate, his bride-to-be, saying, "I will buckle thee against 1,000. I will defend you, Kate," even though he is trying to tame the shrew, and it's all a ploy. And so this character was chosen by Pamela in order to illustrate the meaning of the card as someone who is using words and perhaps manipulating a situation in their own favour. It's a bit like someone making a show of force when they don't need to in order to prove a point, or to pretend that there's something that they're not. And that works very well with our 7 stage in the world of Wands as well. So if you read Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot, Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot, it's because it's a most of the strange things in the deck that people make guesses at are actually far easier to explain with Shakespeare, with what Pamela actually knew, and we explore that in that book, and it explains virtually every strange symbol in the whole deck very easily, and in some cases we have pictures of the actors and actresses of the time looking exactly like Pamela has painted them as well. So we don't need strange ideas about it, something to do with Masonic left foot symbolism, because Pamela wouldn't have been familiar with that. and she deliberately drew something that she knew about because she only had 5 months to do it. And so in this card we have a buckled boot and an unlaced shoe because it fits the exact quote. In a similar way we have, for example, Rosalind in As You Like It is another good example of this, where it actually explains the snail in the card, because if we find the card, and you can use these in readings, that's the important thing for us, that you can actually use this knowledge in a reading because it actually helps deepen the interpretation of the card and get exactly what Pamela and Arthur Edward Waite meant by the design and the card itself. Well, I'll give you another example. This is Falstaff, and there's an exact quote with Falstaff sitting with an unlaced shirt, an unbuckled belt, on a bench. The quote actually says, accuses him of sitting on benches drinking from flagons all day long. And there's a picture of an actor called Oscar Ashe, actually looking, and you can see the similarity. If I showed you that picture of Oscar Ashe in the two historical plays that Falstaff appears in by Shakespeare, you would immediately say that is exactly the same character as the Nine of Cups. There's no doubt about it at all. Okay, so hopefully that will explain a lot of the symbols, but it's all in our book, Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot. Okay then, right, so I would now like to read from Calvino, Invisible Cities. This is our bedtime story. It has a slight passing relationship to tarot, but if you're not into slight passing relationships to tarot, then feel free to tune out now, but you will miss a bedtime story. Okay, so the conceit behind this whole book, Calvino's book, is that Marco Polo, the explorer, is explaining to the fictional Kubla Khan, who he's been sort of captured by in a scene reminiscent of Tales of 1001 Nights. He has to bide his time by telling him stories. So Marco Polo is telling Kubla Khan stories of all of the places he's been. And he's obviously making all of these stories up. Hence they're invisible, not real cities. But we find out as the little sections progress that there's actually a strange structure to all of this, where we have thin cities and invisible cities, cities and eyes, cities and names, cities and the dead, cities and the sky, and we can see that there's some sort of weird structural pattern to all of this, and it's a very fascinating structure that Calvino has set himself. There's a tarot structure in one of his other books that we'll look at over the next few days. Right now, with Denny saying maybe is that I'm not quite sure which book you tried to read and got lost, but hopefully over time returning to books really does help, and so on. So here we go. I'm going to read the introductory bit that sets the scene, and then one of my favourite cities, which is called Tamara. Okay, so this is in Cities and Signs, and it's literally 1 page and a half on that particular city, but I want to read the introduction bit first to set our scene, and then the city really has something to do with tarot, which I hope will become semi-obvious as we read it. So I hope you're sitting comfortably for our bedtime story. Italo Calvino, Invisible Cities. Kubla Khan does not necessarily believe everything Marco Polo says when he describes the cities visited on his expeditions. But the Emperor of the Tartars does continue listening to the young Venetian with greater attention and curiosity than he shows any other explorer or messenger. In the lives of emperors, there is a moment which follows pride in the boundless extension of the territories we have conquered, and the melancholy and relief of knowing we shall soon give up any thoughts of knowing and understanding them. There is a sense of emptiness that comes over us at evening, with the odour of the elephants after the rain and the sandalwood ashes glowing cold in the braziers, a dizziness that makes rivers and mountains tremble on the fallow curves of the planispheres where they are portrayed, and rolls up one after another the dispatches announcing to us the collapse of the last enemy troops from defeat to defeat, and flakes the wax of the seals of obscure kings who beseech our army's protection, offering in exchange annual tributes of precious metals, tanned hides and tortoise shell. It is the desperate moment when we discover that this empire, which had seemed to us the sum of all wonders, is an endless, formless ruin, that corruption's gangrene has spread too far to be healed by our sceptre, that the triumph over enemy sovereigns has made us the heirs of their long undoing. Only in Marco Polo's accounts was Kubla Khan able to discern, through the walls and towers destined to crumble, the tracery of a pattern so subtle it could escape the termites' gnawing. Citizen Signs, Part 1. You walk for days among trees and among stones. Rarely does the eye light on a thing, and then only when it has recognized that thing as the sign of another thing. A print in the sand indicates a tiger's passage. A marsh announces a vein of water. The hibiscus flower, the end of winter. All the rest is silent and interchangeable. Trees and stones are only what they are. Finally, the journey leads to the city of tomorrow. You penetrate it along streets thick with signboards jutting out from the walls. The eye does not see things, but images of things that mean other things. Pincers point out the tooth drawer's house, a tankard, the tavern, halberds, the barracks, scales, the grocer's. Statues and shields depict lions, dolphins, towers, stars. A sign that something, who knows what, has as its sign a lion or a dolphin or a tower or a star. Other signals warn of what is forbidden in a given place: to enter the alley with wagons, to urinate behind the kiosk, to fish with your pole from the bridge, and what is allowed: watering zebras, playing bowls, burning relatives' corpses. From the doors of the temples the god statues are seen, each portrayed with his attributes: the cornucopia, the hourglass, the Medusa, so that the worshipper can recognize them and address his prayers correctly. If a building has no signboard or figure, its very form and the position it occupies in the city's order suffice to indicate its function. The palace, the prison, the mint, the Pythagorean school, the brothel. The wares too which the vendors display on their stalls are valuable not in themselves but as signs of other things. The embroidered headband stands for elegance, the gilded palanquin, power, the volumes of books of Averroes, learning, the ankle bracelet, voluptuousness. Your gaze scans the streets as if they were written pages. The city says everything you must think, makes you repeat her discourse. And while you believe you are visiting tomorrow, you are only recording the names with which she defines herself and all her parts. However the city may really be beneath this thick coating of signs, whatever it may contain or conceal. You leave tomorrow without ever having discovered it. Outside, the land stretches, empty to the horizon. The sky opens with speeding clouds. In the shape that chance and wind give the clouds, you are already intent on recognizing figures. A sailing ship, a hand, an elephant. So that is Tamara, one of the invisible cities described by the noble Marco Polo to the ruler Kublai Khan. And I think and I hope that particularly with our little section on pinpointing and bridging, multivalency, tarot spreads, that has some deep significance. I like to think so. And I think it reminds me of what Arthur Edward Waite said, which is the tarot is symbolism, it needs no other sort of description. But he actually said something like the true tarot is symbolism. And a lot of people tend to use that the wrong way around. They think that the tarot is true symbolism. But what he meant was true symbolism, the symbolic aspect of the world, is a form of tarot. And that's what he really meant. And that's what Calvino is alluding to, and also what Waite eventually alluded to in a book called Steps to the Crown, where he said, at the end of our lives, we will realize that all we have learned to do is read symbols. And I think that has a very important depth to us as symbol readers, as tarot card readers, that the true tarot is actually the symbolism of the world, as was explained and alluded to in Tamara, the city. That when we learn to read the world as a living symbol of something from which it is being generated, something unified, then the sooner we learn to read through our tarot into the world itself. So I hope that's been a thought-provoking story, little section. Tomorrow I'd like to read you a more jolly one about the lares and the penates, and give you some ideas for using those ideas in your daily house, your family, and for looking after yourself, and a personal story about those as well. So tomorrow we're not going to touch tarot at all. We're going to look at a little bit of ritual, a little bit of magic, a little bit of household witchery practice. And then in following days we're going to follow an interesting course with our tarot. So I hope you're all looking after yourself. I'm looking forward to reading to you again tomorrow and talking a little bit about something really important, practical, down to earth, real, honest to God magic. Okay, so take care everyone, have a good night, look after yourselves and everyone else. Bye for now.